بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم السلام على خير خلقه أجمعين نبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. قال الله العظيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Sometimes you and I mention a particular vice, and we have a general idea on how to prevent it. And in some other occasions, this sin is connected and somehow included within the definitions of so many others that it becomes one of the most crucial to avoid and to constantly think about in terms of its repercussions. And that is, of course, ghiba or backbiting. The Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala in chapter 49, verse number 12, as many of us perhaps have come across, presents to us the severe repercussions of al-ghiba. Now, the cause of revelation for this is that there was two people amongst the Sahaba, amongst the companions, who asked Salman, radwanullahi ta'ala alayh. The riwayat say Salman. They don't really mention which Salman, but it's likely to be Salman al-Muhammadi. And they said to him, go and get us some food from the Prophet. Perhaps they wanted some blessings or they were hungry. Salman goes to the Prophet. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says to Salman, go to Usama ibn Zayd. Usama ibn Zayd is his adopted son, but he was made to be in charge of the treasury, Baytul Mal. So Salman goes to Usama and says, do you have any food? And Usama says no. Salman comes back to these two and says, I can't provide you with any food because this is what's happened. These two, what do they say? They then say, Usama is bakhil, he's miserly, he's stingy. Then they say something else, which is that if Salman is sent to a river or a place where there's water and it's flowing with water, he'll dry it up. You know, and perhaps they said this when he left. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they went to the Prophet, these two later, and the Prophet saw them and said, why have you got marks on your faces as if you've just eaten meat, flesh, signs? So we haven't eaten any meat or flesh. He said, you have committed backbiting, and this is how the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala has kind of compared it, the action of backbiting, to eating the corpse or the flesh of the corpse of one's brother or sister. Now, ghiba is one of those where the definition is subject to some discussion amongst the scholars of akhlaq and spirituality. They give a broad definition, but the detailed understanding of what it is, how one can really define what is ghiba or not, is slightly different in that because there are so many other sins connected with ghiba, you see different scholars may look at it from a different perspective. So hence you find the various kinds of definitions of ghiba. But as a principle, it is mentioned as this: الغيبة ذكر الآخرين بما يسؤهم في ظهر الغيب. Ghiba generally is to mention others in a way that they dislike when they're not present. That's the general definition. So when you talk about somebody in a manner in which if they heard that you talked in that such a way, they will be unhappy. That's defined as backbiting, as a general principle. However, the scholars come forward and say, yes, we can understand it as such, but there are certain criteria that must be fulfilled for ghiba in itself to be the case, to actually be determined or for it to take place. These conditions are the following. They say, number one, it should be that the individual is revealing that which is hidden from people, or that which is generally not known, or that which is not exposed to the world or to everyone else. So for example, you saw someone do something, and then you speak to someone and you say, I can't believe it. I saw him do that. But these people, this individual you're speaking to, did not see that individual committing this act. And perhaps committing this act amongst a group of individuals or within a very restricted area. Certainly not something public. Yes? However, if it was something public, so if somebody comes and does something in front of a lot of people, or it is known somehow, does this make it ghiba? It doesn't, but it doesn't make it okay. Do you see? When we're talking about these criteria, it's very important to understand. We're not saying if you don't fulfill the criteria, it is okay. We're saying if you don't fulfill the criteria, it's not ghiba, but it's something else, which is also forbidden. So that's a key thing to understand. Number two, it must be something which is true in that person, not a falsification, not a lie, not something that's made up about that individual. So if you've seen them do something actually real, in other words, you're not making it up, and that is ghiba. If it's something that they haven't done, and you talk about it, and you say they've done it, that's another thing called buhtan, slander. It's perhaps even worse. Yeah? Number three, this is an interesting one because some of the scholars say the intention should be for degrading, for mocking, for laughing, or to depict the individual negatively, or to show them in lower status. So when you mention something, or when you talk about something, or refer to something, or write or type something about somebody, which is number one, not known by people. Number two, actually true. And number three, the purpose behind it is to somehow get people to laugh, somehow to make yourself feel better by presenting yourself to be a better individual, somehow degrading them, lowering their status. One thing is important here that the scholars say, sometimes we are in a position, we'll talk about it in a few moments, on when we are allowed to practice ghiba. And in certain instances where, for example, there is an ill individual in hospital who's unconscious, and the doctor comes and says, for example, can you tell me certain things? And you're revealing information which is hidden, which maybe the patient does not want the doctor to know. But it's necessary, but you're not revealing it because you want the doctor to have a bad idea about the patient. So there's the intention here is different. Yes? Or sometimes when you speak to people about the good features of other people, they may dislike it. So one of the features, one of the ticks in the list happens. So number one, it's something they've done privately. You saw someone donate or help a poor person. Yes? It's good. It's done in private. Not many people know it. Yeah? And it's true. You come and speak to people about it. You know, I saw this person do something good. Yeah? But the intention is not to bring them down. Intention is not to degrade them. So that's why it's not ghibah. Some ulama say it's better to then ask their permission. Maybe they don't want people to know about this, but certainly not ghibah, even though it ticks the other boxes, so to speak. Yes? Number 4, it must be a statement or an act which identifies the person. So the name, something which alludes to where they are, who they are. If you talk about a community or somebody in the community or a number of people where the tahdeed, the specification, the identification of that individual is not possible, yeah, is not ghibah. Again, it may fall into another sin, but it wouldn't necessarily fall into the category of ghibah. But sometimes with these, it's a very dangerous element. That perhaps both the person, the speaker, and the listener, when they're conversing or communicating, they say, I don't want to mention, their name, but that person who did this and this and that. The moment that person who is listening knows who that individual is, it's their responsibility to say, stop. You know what? I know who that person is. Don't mention. Don't keep going. Yeah? And sometimes, subhanAllah, shaitan comes within the framework of people's understanding of sharia. So, people talk about somebody and say, I don't want to tell you who he is, but I'm sure you all know. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Or just say the name, then what else is left? You're trying to avoid ghibah, but somehow you want people to, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you know the person I'm referring to, for example, in that aspect. Number 5, it's the idea that they must be a Muslim and possibly a mu'min. Sheikh Sahib al-Makasib al-Ansari, Sheikh Murtada al-Ansari, has a discussion about the Muslim mu'min. I wouldn't go into it in this stage. However, does that make backbiting non-Muslims okay? No. In essence, is the definition then backbiting? No. But is it right? No. Because what does it do? It creates within the human being the hypocrisy. Yes, I can for this person, not for that person. Yeah. Number 2, it gives a bad image. It develops into the human being the ability or the audacity to commit or to say wrong, vile words sometimes, or even inappropriate comments, so to speak. And actually we have interesting stories at the time of the Imam alayhim salam where they emphasize this point, where we had a very, somebody who was a close or a companion of Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam. And one day he called his slave girl, this person who was a companion of Imam, in the presence of the Imam, and he kind of used a derogatory term to refer to her mother. And the Imam said, why did you do that? He said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, she's not Muslim. It's okay. The mother of the slave girl is not Muslim. Imam said so. And Imam severed his relationship with that person. The narration says he never spoke to him again. So it's not that it's okay, but it's because from the Qur'an. أَيَحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ. This أخيه means what? Muslim. Muslim brother or sister. That's the derivative. So we're talking about the fiqh rather than necessarily the ethical elements that are connected to it. And finally, a very crucial condition for it to be fulfilled, to be known as a ghibah, is that the mughtab, the one who we're actually talking about, must not be mutajahiran bil fisq, meaning that they openly and publicly sin, and known as a fasiq, an open public sinner. Somebody who does sins just in view of everyone and is not necessarily a muttaqi, or somebody who tries and so on and so forth. And that is something which excludes them from the definition or the idea of ghibah. Now, how ghibah is practiced or performed, not only by words, of course, through movements of the hands, through writing, through ishara. Ishara means to point, yeah? through keyboard. It's not found in books 300 years ago, 200 years ago, but it is certainly an application of it today. And we have a narration that one of the wives of the Holy Prophet talked about one of the ladies and said, she didn't say anything, she just said that, to point that she's short. And the Prophet said that you have committed ghibah. She didn't necessarily say anything, but she just pointed to it to kind of give an idea about somebody, which is somehow derogatory. And the repercussions, just to remind ourselves of this action, is quite severe. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam in a hadith states, it's narrated to have said, it's in Wasa'il al-Shi'a, volume 8, Man rawa ala mu'minin riwaya yuridu biha shayna, whomsoever narrates or talks about a believer in a way that they want to degrade them, in a way that they want to put them down, وَهَدَمَ مُرُوءَتَهُ, and wants to destroy their reputation or their sanctity or what's associated with them, لِيَسْقِطَهُ مِنْ أَعْيُنَ النَّاسِ, because they want people to look at them, to look at that individual with less respect, to degrade them in the eyes of people. أَخْرَجَهُ اللَّهُ مِنْ وِلَايَتِهِ إِلَى وِلَايَةِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes this person out from his guardianship, meaning that where Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala looks after him, Allahu waliyul ladhina amanu, yes, He takes him out of this protection, guidance, bestowing of favors and blessings and mercy, and He kind of hands him over to the shaitan. But the key thing is, فَلَا يَقْبَلُهُ الشَّيْطَانِ. Shaitan doesn't want him as well, to that extent. Imam alayhi salam says that the individual who commits this, and notice the kind of the graphic description, the idea that if an individual backbites and practices ghibah, they're eating the flesh of their brother and sister. Why the flesh? Because when there is a dead body, they can't move or do anything to help themselves. So when you're talking about someone in such a way, in their absence, with all the things that we mentioned, they're not there to defend themselves. And so this kind of parable is drawn to remind us of the action itself. How sometimes it happens is crucial to remind ourselves as well. That yes, we may be conscious and at the same time quite determined to avoid ghibah from time to time, but sometimes it creeps its way into our conversation. So, as examples, for example, if we say, may Allah forgive that person for doing such an act. You come into ghibah from the door of the forgiveness element. So in a way you're saying, yeah, I'm praying for him, but you're actually backbiting by saying what they actually did. May Allah forgive him for that element. Or sometimes you find people in conversations say, I hope this is not ghibah. I hope it's not ghibah, but this and this. I don't know, by hoping, what do you hope to achieve? Somehow they give themselves a platform to spring forward with the backbiting by somehow thinking that maybe it's not ghibah. Inshallah, maybe it's not ghibah, and then they say it. So if there's hesitation, sometimes through the hesitation, the shaitan can influence. In certain instances, we have the permissibility of so-called backbiting, or what we have defined. Number one is dhulm. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 148, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. Allah does not allow the expression and talking about the wrong of the people except when there's oppression, except when the people are demanding justice. And this is only in aspects in which they have been oppressed. So it's not a green light to talk about that person in other ways. So if you're demanding or seeking justice, for example, in marital relationships, if a person, husband or wife, has been oppressed, and they go to somebody who can resolve it, but who can resolve it? not anyone, with all respect. Not pick up the phone with respect sometimes to parents if they can resolve it, bismillah. But not to somehow, because they feel angry and they want to let it out, yes, they start spreading it to their family members, and this person's done this to me and that person's done that. You have to preserve the sanctity and at the same time be aware of the dangers of ghiba in a marital relationship as well, as an example. Secondly, if it involves the protection and the preservation of religion, life, honor and property, meaning that sometimes you see some vice or something wrong going on, yeah, and you genuinely want to stop that, so you go to authority or you go to their parent or whatever, and you've seen something which is really wrong, but you're saying it so that it is stopped. You're saying it as part of nahi anil munkar. Again, go back to the point of the intention. That seems to play quite an important role in what is defined as ghiba and not. Number 3, if it is a question that's posed to scholars, istifta, and details need to be presented, as we mentioned earlier, with regards to some elements or aspects of certain people, then that seems to be also permissible. Number 4, al-istishara means consultation. Consultation here is in reference to 2 particular examples, marriage and business, they say, although it can be somehow included in several other consultations, but mainly these are the 2 that most people engage in. Marriage, it is permissible when somebody asks us about a person to reveal some of their defects that we have information about, but importantly, not to spice it up. We've been in instances where people get a bit too excited and they start talking about things about that individual for other motives, and that is in danger of going into buhtan and slander and kadhib and so on and so forth, as well as if somebody wants to enter in a business transaction or a partnership rather, they may want to see, okay, are they reliable, are they trustworthy, can you give me examples, and so on and so forth. And the other one is al-mutajahir bil-fisq, as we mentioned, that if somebody is a hakim, who is a ruler, who is fasiq, who is a zalim, and somebody who is openly fasiq, openly commits sins and transgressions and vile acts, then the permissibility of ghiba is there. The kaffara is divided into 2 when it comes to ghiba. There's one that's agreed upon by all ulama and one that some of the scholars have perhaps encouraged. The first is to seek istighfar, first of all, for oneself, for what oneself has mentioned, but also for the person that has been the subject of the ghiba, and to pay sadaqah on their behalf. So that's something that it is mentioned that we should do, a dua lahu, to remember them in dua and so on and so forth. But there are narrations such as the one in Kitab al-Makasir from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. من اغتاب مسلما أو مسلمة لم يقبل الله صلاته ولا صيامه 40 يوما وليلة. Whomsoever practices ghiba on a Muslim or a Muslimah, Allah does not accept their prayers nor their fast for 40 days and nights. إلا أن يغفر له صاحبه. Only if that person forgives them. And we have other narration that says ghiba is worse than zina, adultery, because Allah forgives the adultery, whereas for ghiba Allah forgives, but you have to also seek the pardon of the person that we, God forbid, have said something in that regard. So that is what has been mentioned to be something ideal for the human beings to do, and that's to seek pardon, to seek forgiveness from the individuals that perhaps we have spoken about in such a way. However, there is the problem of escalating matters, because as we know, human beings have different degrees of acceptance and willingness to forgive, and certainly if it has been something that spread in the community, God forbid, unfortunately, in my humble opinion, and I could be wrong, but it's much easier now to backbite than it was 5 years ago. And it's much easier 5 years ago than 10 years before that, and much easier in the 21st century than 7th century Arabia. But you could perhaps argue about that. The means of communication today are widespread. We can talk with people everywhere and anytime. Yes? Which at that time, you can only speak to people face to face. Yes? You have to see someone to backbite. Now you don't have to see someone to backbite. You can speak to them on the phone, you can send them a message, you can tweet about it, you can do whatever. Yes? You can go on media, you can have a website. Yes? Only last week, I saw a Facebook post in Arabic by one of the brothers. He had a clip by one of the Zakirin, scholars, or Majlis reciter. But the Majlis reciter is Mu'ammam, he wears the imama, and he's a Sayyid. And in this particular post, which I saw myself, this brother said, this individual is like a donkey. The stuff that he's saying, everything that he talks about is nonsense. Where did you get this from? How this? And at the end, he says, I would like to apologize to the donkey for equating him with this person, because a donkey is better. Yes? I looked at this and I said, Subhanallah. You know? How and why? Today I read the news in Iraq that one of the scholars, it's his opinion, he came in a lecture and talked about, you know, the need for the Iraqi people to reduce their consumption of chocolates. Yeah? The Guardian grabbed this news. They wrote a whole article about it. In Arabic, in Iraqi, the word for chocolate is the kind of derivation, the word from Nestle. So they put the Nestle sign and says, scholar advocates less chocolates, and so on and so forth. But then it goes on to say the amount of mocking and laughing and ridiculing on social media in Iraq and elsewhere is something that could be seen. People are laughing at him, talking about him. I said, how can they? And then I saw this article being shared, and one brother that I know mentioned some word against this sheikh and said, this sheikh, how can you say this about the chocolates? Yes? Perhaps he hasn't had chocolates for a long time, and he felt quite passionate that a sheikh is telling eat less chocolate. But it's for the people in Iraq. You don't have to, yourself reduce the chocolate consumption, And maybe he meant a certain chocolate, not your favorite one. Whatever it is. But what gives the right for somebody, even if there is somebody out there speaking in such a way, there is the freedom to somehow all of a sudden use whatever word, whatever expression, and publicly, Allahu Akbar, publicly. And it's a disease that spread, sadly, in some places around the world. We have to be very careful about it. So if we find that by going to someone and telling them, I'm sorry, I have spoken about you in such a way, that they would react in a way where they would sever the relationship with us, it might make things worse, then the scholars say it is better not to do that, and instead to pray for them and to seek istighfar for them and for ourselves, and to pay sadaqah on their behalf. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us strength and tawfiq to be able to observe our speech, our conduct, how we understand these pivotal concepts for the refinement of our souls, and to stay away from the temptations of shaitan. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصل اللهم على محمد وآله الطاهرين.